Most child stars can't wait to relive their glory days on screen. But for Johnny Whitaker, the freckle-faced, red-headed sweetheart from Family Affair, there's one episode he refuses to watch. Not because it was embarrassing, not because it flopped, but because it hit so close to home. It left a scar he's carried ever since. The cameras were rolling. The lights were bright. But behind that adorable smile was a 6-year-old boy unraveling inside. And the story behind that single episode? It's far more heartbreaking than anyone ever imagined. Long before the world knew him as Jody from Family Affair, Johnny Whitaker was already stealing the spotlight. He was just 3 years old when he stepped in front of a camera for the very first time. A local car commercial that marked the beginning of something much bigger. With his bright red hair, natural charm, and an uncanny ability to connect with the audience, Johnny didn't just perform, he belonged on screen. It didn't take long for national brands to take notice. Mattel, one of the biggest toy companies in the country at the time, cast him in a string of popular commercials. He wasn't just a face. He gave life to animated toys like Larry the Lion and Crackers the Parrot, pulling kids into a world of talking animals with just his voice and expressions. Every line he delivered felt real, warm, and exciting. For kids across America, Johnny was Saturday morning, but commercials were just the start. By the time he was 6, he'd landed a role on General Hospital, playing a young Scotty Baldwin. It was a rare move for a child actor, transitioning from selling toys to holding his own in dramatic scenes with seasoned adult performers. His emotional range, even at that age, was impossible to ignore. And just when it seemed like his young career had hit an early peak, Hollywood came calling. Johnny was cast in the Cold War satire, "The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming," a big studio film that introduced him to someone who would change his life forever, actor Brian Keith. But Johnny had no idea that one brief connection on a movie set would launch him into a role that would define his childhood, and eventually haunt it. When Brian Keith was later cast as the lead in a new CBS sitcom called Family Affair, he didn't hesitate to recommend one name for the role of his on-screen nephew, Johnny Whitaker. And just like that, Johnny was handed the role of Jody Davis, an orphaned boy adjusting to life in a lavish New York apartment under the care of a bachelor uncle and a proper British butler. Originally, the show's producers had something else in mind. Jody and his sister Buffy weren't supposed to be twins at all. But when Johnny and fellow child star Anissa Jones read together for the first time, their chemistry was undeniable. They looked like siblings, acted like siblings, and more importantly, felt like siblings. The producers rewrote the characters on the spot. From that moment forward, they were twins. Family Affair exploded in popularity. Audiences fell in love with Johnny's wide-eyed innocence and heartfelt delivery. Week after week, millions tuned in to watch Jody and Buffy navigate childhood in a world that had already taken so much from them. But what viewers didn't see was what it took behind the scenes to bring that vulnerability to life. For Johnny, playing Jody wasn't just a role, it was a mirror. And while the world saw a charming little boy in knee socks and suspenders, Johnny was already learning how to hide exhaustion, pressure, and the weight of fame behind every line. But it would be one episode, just one, that pushed him further than he ever expected. And it started with a missing doll. On the surface, Family Affair was wholesome, sweet, and often gently comedic. But every so often, it dipped into something deeper. In the episode titled Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You? Zrenia, the show centered around Buffy's panic over losing her beloved doll. For any other show, it might have been played for laughs. But this episode struck a different chord. To adults, it may have seemed like a simple story about a lost toy. But for Johnny, and for millions of kids who had faced their own losses, Mrs. Beasley wasn't just a doll. She was a symbol of comfort in a world that didn't always make sense. And for Jody and Buffy, whose fictional parents had died, she represented the last fragile thread of stability in their lives. The script demanded something emotionally intense: fear, grief, helplessness, and not in a cartoonish way. Real, raw vulnerability. And Johnny, just 6 years old, had to bring all of that to the surface on cue. Behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. Johnny had formed a real bond with Anissa Jones. The two were practically inseparable on set, and acting out scenes where one of them was devastated or afraid didn't feel like make-believe. It felt personal. Every tear in that episode was real. Johnny later admitted that he wasn't just pretending to cry, he was crying. Crying from a place inside he didn't fully understand. A place no 6-year-old should have had to reach for the sake of a TV performance. The cameras kept rolling. The episode would become a fan favorite. But what the audience didn't know was that Johnny had just acted through something far more real than anyone suspected. For millions of viewers, Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You? Was just another touching moment in a beloved show. But for Johnny Whitaker, it became something far more complicated. That 1966 episode demanded a level of emotional honesty that few adults could handle, let alone a 6-year-old child navigating sudden fame. It wasn't just about acting sad over a lost toy. It was about tapping into something Johnny couldn't yet name: fear of loss, fear of change, fear of being left behind. The performance required him to cry, not politely, not prettily, but genuinely. He had to reach into places that, at his age, he didn't even know existed. Years later, Johnny would admit that those tears were real, not from any clever acting technique, but from a deep emotional exhaustion he wasn't old enough to process. He was still just a kid, expected to deliver perfect takes, memorize lines, and hit emotional beats on demand. The episode may have looked polished on the outside, but behind the scenes, it was a breaking point. Johnny wasn't just pretending to be overwhelmed. He was overwhelmed. And in that moment, the line between fiction and reality blurred in a way that would stay with him for decades. The audience saw a brilliant young actor in a heartfelt scene. Johnny remembers something else entirely. The day performing stopped feeling safe. Long after the episode aired, the aftershocks lingered. To the world, Johnny was thriving, a TV star, praised for his talent and poise. But inside, something had shifted. That episode marked the first time he felt truly vulnerable in front of millions, and not in a way that felt empowering. It felt invasive, raw, exposing. He later described the experience as a capsule of pain, a moment frozen in time where he felt both deeply seen and completely unseen. It wasn't just acting anymore. It was something much more personal. As the years went by, that episode became something Johnny avoided. Not because it was poorly done, but because it captured a version of himself he never wanted to revisit. A little boy performing heartbreak before he had the tools to understand what heartbreak really was. What made it worse was the silence. Child actors in the 60s didn't get therapy. They didn't get time to process. They got another script, another scene, another set call. And Johnny? He learned how to smile on cue while quietly carrying that unspoken weight. But he wouldn't carry it alone forever, because a few years later, tragedy would turn that weight into something even heavier. Years after Family Affair ended, the cast slowly drifted apart, as most do. But for Johnny Whitaker, one connection never faded: his bond with Anissa Jones, the young actress who played Buffy. They had grown up together on screen, navigating fame side by side. And while their characters were fictional twins, Their real-life friendship ran just as deep. But in 1976, that bond was shattered. Anissa Jones passed away suddenly at just 18 years old. The official cause was a mix of prescription and illegal substances, a tragic ending that left Hollywood and Johnny reeling. To this day, her story remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of the toll child stardom can take. For Johnny, it wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was the loss of the one person who truly understood what it meant to live inside that show, behind the smiles, behind the scripts. And suddenly, that one episode, the one where their characters clung to Mrs. Beasley like she was the only stable thing left, took on an unbearable new meaning. Watching it now, Johnny says, would feel like watching a ghost. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a memory soaked in real pain. The scenes they filmed together, once full of make-believe, now felt like a haunting echo of everything that was lost far too soon. And for Johnny, that episode stopped being just television. It became a tombstone carved in celluloid. Despite the heartbreak, Johnny Whitaker never disappeared. As he got older, he slowly stepped out of the spotlight, but not out of the industry. He became a computer consultant for CBS, worked behind the scenes in talent management, and even helped guide other young actors through the same maze he once struggled to survive. One of those actors was Dana Plato, another child star whose career was plagued with pressure and pain. Johnny tried to help her stay grounded, proof that he hadn't just survived his past, but wanted to make something meaningful from it. He was also honored for his early work, receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Youth in Film Association in 1999. It was recognition not just for his performances, but for the grace with which he carried the legacy of being a child star. And in time, he did return to the stage and screen in small ways, guest roles, cameos, even co-hosting a radio show. But that one episode from 1966, it stayed locked away. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because it represented something too real, too vulnerable, too permanently etched into his childhood. In interviews, Johnny has said he still cherishes Family Affair and the role that changed his life. He smiles when fans approach him. He celebrates the show's legacy, but he draws a clear line in the sand. That episode is where the line blurs between acting and feeling, and it's a place he has no interest in revisiting. In interviews, he's been clear. He won't watch it. Not now. Maybe not ever. Not because the acting was poor or the writing was flawed. Quite the opposite. The episode was beautifully crafted, a touching tribute to childhood grief and resilience. But that's exactly why he avoids it. To him, that episode doesn't just represent a fictional loss. It represents his loss of innocence, of control, of the ability to separate performance from pain. It marked the moment he realized that fame comes at a cost, and that not all childhoods get to be carefree, even when they're wrapped in laughter, applause, and brightly lit sound stages. And watching it now, it would be like picking at a scar that never fully healed. It would bring back the weight of unsaid emotions, the emotional labor of pretending to be okay when he wasn't, and the ghost of a friend whose presence made that pain feel a little less lonely. Some memories are treasured, others are survived. And for Johnny, that episode falls firmly in the latter. For Johnny Whitaker, it was something much deeper, a moment of real, unscripted vulnerability captured on film and replayed for the world to see. His refusal to re-watch it isn't a weakness. It's not denial. It's a boundary, an act of self-awareness from someone who had to grow up in front of millions, learning hard truths before he even lost his baby teeth. Because the truth is, The hardest performances aren't the ones filled with lines and rehearsals. They're the ones that ask you to feel something real, before you've had a chance to understand what it means. And for Johnny Whitaker, Mrs. Beasley, Where Are You? Will always be that kind of performance. A beautiful, painful echo from a time when acting became indistinguishable from life itself.